Hello. Thank you for joining me today. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and leave me a comment if you enjoy my videos. Welcome to Nomad's Land Studios. Narrations by Rebecca. One Full Hour of Hans Christian Andersen Fairytales, Volume 2. The Red Shoes. There was once a little girl, very nice and very pretty, but so poor that she had to go barefooted all summer. And in winter she had to wear thick wooden shoes that chafed her ankles until they were red. Oh, as red as could be. In the middle of the village lived old Mother Shoemaker. She took some old scraps of red cloth and did her best to make them into a little pair of shoes. They were a bit clumsy, but well meant, for she intended to give them to the little girl. Karen was the little girl's name. The first time Karen wore her new red shoes was on the very day when her mother was buried. Of course, they were not right for mourning, but they were all she had, so she put them on and walked bare-legged after the plain wicker coffin. Just then a large old carriage came by, with a large old lady inside it. She looked at the little girl and took pity upon her, and she went to the parson and said, "Give the little girl to me, and I shall take good care of her." Karen was sure that this happened because she wore red shoes, but the old lady said the shoes were hideous and ordered them burned. Karen was given proper new clothes. She was taught to read, and she was taught to sew. People said she was pretty, but her mirror told her, "You are more than pretty, you are beautiful." It happened that the queen came traveling through the country with her little daughter, who was a princess. Karen went with all the people who flocked to see them at the castle. The little princess, all dressed in white, came to the window to let them admire her. She didn't wear a train, and she didn't wear a gold crown, but she did wear a pair of splendid red Morocco shoes. Of course, they were much nicer than the ones old Mother Shoemaker had put together for little Karen, but there's nothing in the world like a pair of red shoes. When Karen was old enough to be confirmed, new clothes were made for her, and she was to have new shoes. They went to the house of a thriving shoemaker to have him take the measure of her little feet. In his shop were big glass cases, filled with the prettiest shoes and the shiniest boots. They looked most attractive, but, as the old lady did not see very well, they did not attract her. Among the shoes there was a pair of red leather ones that were just like those the princess had worn. How perfect they were! The shoemaker said he had made them for the daughter of a count, but that they did not quite fit her. "They must be patent leather to shine so," said the old lady. "Yes, indeed they shine," said Karen. As the shoes fitted Karen, the old lady bought them, but she had no idea they were red. If she had known that, she would never have let Karen wear them to confirmation, which is just what Karen did. Every eye was turned toward her feet. When she walked up the aisle to the chancel of the church, it seemed to her as if even those portraits of bygone ministers and their wives, in starched ruffs and long black gowns, even they fixed their eyes upon her red shoes. She could think of nothing else, even when the pastor laid his hands upon her head and spoke of her holy baptism, and her covenant with God, and her duty as a Christian. The solemn organ rolled, the children sang sweetly, and the old choir leader sang too, but Karen thought of nothing except her red shoes. Before the afternoon was over, the old lady had heard from everyone in the parish that the shoes were red. She told Karen it was naughty to wear red shoes to church, highly improper. In the future, she was always to wear black shoes to church, even though they were her old ones. Next Sunday there was Holy Communion. Karen looked at her black shoes. She looked at her red ones. She kept looking at her red ones until she put them on. It was a fair, sunny day. Karen and the old lady took the path through the cornfield where it was rather dusty. At the church door they met an old soldier who stood with a crutch and wore a long, curious beard. It was more reddish than white. In fact, it was quite red. He bowed down to the ground and asked the old lady if he might dust her shoes. Karen put out her little foot too. "Oh, what beautiful shoes for dancing," said the soldier. "Never come off when you dance," he told the shoes as he tapped the sole of each of them with his hand. The old lady gave the soldier a penny and went on into the church with Karen. All the people there stared at Karen's red shoes, and all the portraits stared too. When Karen knelt at the altar rail, and even when the chalice came to her lips, she could think only of her red shoes. It was as if they kept floating around in the chalice, and she forgot to sing the psalm. She forgot to say the Lord's Prayer. Then the church was over, and the old lady got into her carriage. Karen was lifting her foot to step in after her when the old soldier said, "Oh, what beautiful shoes for dancing." Karen couldn't resist taking a few dancing steps, and once she began, her feet kept on dancing. It was as if the shoes controlled her. She danced round the corner of the church. She simply could not help it. The coachman had to run after her, catch her, and lift her into the carriage. But even there, her feet went on dancing, so that she gave the good old lady a terrible kicking. Only when she took her shoes off did her legs quiet down. When they got home, the shoes were put away in a cupboard, but Karen would still go and look at them. Shortly afterward, the old lady was taken ill, and it was said she could not recover. She required constant care and faithful nursing, and for this she depended on Karen. But a great ball was being given in the town, and Karen was invited. She looked at the old lady, who could not live in any case. She looked at the red shoes, for she thought there was no harm in looking. She put them on, for she thought there was no harm in that either. But then she went to the ball and began dancing. When she tried to turn to the right, the shoes turned to the left. When she wanted to dance up the ballroom, her shoes danced down. They danced down the stairs, into the street, and out through the gate of the town. Dance she did, and dance she must, straight into the dark woods. Suddenly, something shone through the trees, and she thought it was the moon, but it turned out to be the red-bearded soldier. He nodded and said, "Oh, what beautiful shoes for dancing." She was terribly frightened, and tried to take off her shoes. She tore off her stockings, but the shoes had grown fast to her feet, and dance she did, for dance she must, over fields and valleys, in the rain and in the sun, by day and night. It was most dreadful by night. She danced over an unfenced graveyard, but the dead did not join her dance. They had better things to do. She tried to sit on a pauper's grave, where the bitter fennel grew, but there was no rest or peace for her there. And when she danced toward the open doors of the church, she saw it guarded by an angel with long white robes and wings that reached from his shoulders down to the ground. His face was grave and stern, and in his hand he held a broad, shining sword. "Dance you shall," he told her. "Dance in your red shoes until you are pale and cold, and your flesh shrivels down to the skeleton. Dance you shall from door to door, and wherever there are children proud and vain, you must knock at the door till they hear you, and are afraid of you. Dance you shall. Dance always." "Have mercy upon me!" screamed Karen, but she did not hear the angel answer. Her shoes swept her out through the gate and across the fields, along highways and byways, forever and always dancing. One morning she danced by a door she knew well. There was the sound of a hymn, and a coffin was carried out covered with flowers. Then she knew the old lady was dead. She was all alone in the world now, and cursed by the angel of God. Dance she did, and dance she must, through the dark night. Her shoes took her through thorn and briar that scratched her until she bled. She danced across the wastelands until she came to a lonely little house. She knew that this was where the executioner lived, and she tapped with her finger on his window pane. "Come out," she called. "Come out! I can't come in, for I am dancing." The executioner said, "You don't seem to know who I am. I strike off the heads of bad people, and I feel my axe beginning to quiver." "Don't strike off my head, for then I could not repent of my sins," said Karen. "But strike off my feet, with the red shoes on them." She confessed her sin, and the executioner struck off her feet, with the red shoes on them. The shoes danced away with her little feet, over the fields into the deep forest. but he made wooden feet and a pair of crutches for her. He taught her a hymn that prisoners sing when they are sorry for what they have done. She kissed his hand that held the axe and went back across the wasteland. "Now I have suffered enough for those red shoes," she said. "I shall go and be seen again in the church." She hobbled to church as fast as she could, but when she got there, the red shoes danced in front of her, and she was frightened and turned back. All week long she was sorry and cried many bitter tears. But when Sunday came again, she said, "Now I have suffered and cried enough. I think I must be as good as many who sit in church and hold their heads high." She started out unafraid, but the moment she came to the church gate, she saw her red shoes dancing before her. More frightened than ever, she turned away, and with all her heart, she really repented. She went to the pastor's house and begged him to give her work as a servant. She promised to work hard and do all that she could. Wages did not matter, if only she could have a roof over her head and be with good people. The pastor's wife took pity on her and gave her work at the parsonage. Karen was faithful and serious. She sat quietly in the evening and listened to every word when the pastor read the Bible aloud. The children were devoted to her, but when they spoke of frills and furbelows, and of being as beautiful as a queen, she would shake her head. When they went to church next Sunday, they asked her to go too, but with tears in her eyes, she looked at her crutches and shook her head. The others went to hear the word of God, but she went to her lonely little room, which was just big enough to hold her bed and one chair. She sat with her hymnal in her hands, and as she read it with a contrite heart, she heard the organ roll. The wind carried the sound from the church to her window. Her face was wet with tears as she lifted it up and said, "Help me, O Lord." Then the sun shone bright, and the white-robed angel stood before her. He was the same angel she had seen that night at the door of the church, but he no longer held a sharp sword. In his hand was a green branch covered with roses. He touched the ceiling with it. There was a golden star where it touched, and the ceiling rose high. He touched the walls, and they opened wide. She saw the deep-toned organ. She saw the portraits of the ministers and their wives. She saw the congregation sit in flower-decked pews and sing from their hymnals. Either the church had come to the poor girl in her narrow little room, or it was she who had been brought to the church. She sat in the pew with the pastor's family. When they had finished the hymn, they looked up and nodded to her. "It was right for you to come, little Karen," they said. "It was God's own mercy," she told them. The organ sounded, and the children in the choir sang, softly and beautifully. Clear sunlight streamed warm through the window, right down to the pew where Karen sat. She was so filled with the light of it, and with joy and with peace, that her heart broke. Her soul traveled along the shaft of sunlight to heaven, where no one questioned her about the red shoes. The Tinderbox. There came a soldier marching down the high road. 1, 2, 1, 2. He had his knapsack on his back and his sword at his side as he came home from the wars. On the road he met a witch, an ugly old witch, a witch whose lower lip dangled right down on her chest. "Good evening, soldier," she said. "What a fine sword you've got there, and what a big knapsack. Aren't you every inch a soldier? And now you shall have money, as much as you please." "That's very kind of you, you old witch," said the soldier. "See that big tree?" The witch pointed to one nearby them. "It's hollow to the roots. Climb to the top of the trunk and you'll find a hole through which you can let yourself down deep under the tree. I'll tie a rope around your middle so that when you call me, I can pull you up again." "What would I do deep down under that tree?" the soldier wanted to know. "Fetch money," the witch said. "Listen, when you touch the bottom, you'll find yourself in a great hall. It is very bright there, because more than 100 lamps are burning. By their light you will see 3 doors. Each door has a key in it, so you can open them all. If you walk into the first room, you'll see a large chest in the middle of the floor. On it sits a dog, and his eyes are as big as saucers. But don't worry about that. I'll give you my blue-checked apron to spread out on the floor. Snatch up that dog and set him on my apron. Then you can open the chest and take out as many pieces of money as you please. They are all copper. But if silver suits you better, then go into the next room. There sits a dog, and his eyes are as big as mill wheels. But don't you care about that. Set the dog on my apron while you line your pockets with silver. Maybe you'd rather have gold. You can, you know. You can have all the gold you can carry if you go into the third room. The only hitch is that there on the money chest sits a dog, and each of his eyes is as big as the round tower of Copenhagen. That's the sort of dog he is, but never you mind how fierce he looks. Just set him on my apron, and he'll do you no harm as you help yourself from the chest to all the gold you want.
That suits me, said the soldier. But what do you get out of all this, you old witch? I suppose that you want your share.
No, no, indeed, said the witch. I don't want a penny of it. All I ask is for you to fetch me an old tinderbox that my grandmother forgot the last time she was down there.
Good, said the soldier. Tie the rope around me.
Here it is, said the witch, and here's my blue-checked apron. The soldier climbed up to the hole in the tree and let himself slide through it, feet foremost, down into the great hall where the hundreds of lamps were burning, just as the witch had said. Now he threw open the first door he came to. Ugh! There sat a dog glaring at him with eyes as big as saucers.
Well, you're a nice fellow, the soldier said, as he shifted him to the witch's apron and took all the coppers that his pockets would hold.
He shut up the chest, set the dog back on it, and made for the second room. Alas and alack! There sat the dog with eyes as big as mill wheels.
Don't you look at me like that, the soldier set him on the witch's apron. You're apt to strain your eyesight.
When he saw the chest brimful of silver, he threw away all his coppers and filled both his pockets and knapsack with silver alone. Then he went into the third room.
Oh, what a horrible sight to see! The dog in there really did have eyes as big as the round tower, and when he rolled them, they spun like wheels.
Good evening, the soldier said, and saluted, for such a dog he had never seen before. But on second glance he thought to himself, this won't do. So he lifted the dog down to the floor and threw open the chest. What a sight! Here was gold and to spare. He could buy out all Copenhagen with it. He could buy all the cake women's sugar pigs, and all the 10 soldiers, whips, and rocking horses there are in the world. Yes, there was really money. In short order, the soldier got rid of all the silver coins he had stuffed in his pockets and knapsack to put gold in their place. Yes, sir, he crammed all his pockets, his knapsack, his cap, and his boots, so full that he scarcely could walk. Now he was made of money. Putting the dog back on the chest, he banged out the door and called up through the hollow tree.
Pull me up now, you old witch.
Have you got the tinderbox? Asked the witch.
Confound the tinderbox, the soldier shouted. I clean forgot it.
When he fetched it, the witch hauled him up. There he stood on the high road again with his pockets, boots, knapsack, and cap full of gold.
What do you want with the tinderbox? He asked the old witch.
None of your business, she told him. You've had your money, so hand over my tinderbox.
Nonsense, said the soldier. I'll take out my sword and I'll cut off your head if you don't tell me at once what you want with it.
I won't, the witch screamed at him. So he cut her head off. There she lay. But he tied all his money in her apron, slung it over his shoulders, stuck the tinderbox in his pocket, and struck out for town. It was a splendid town. He took the best rooms at the best inn and ordered all the good things he liked to eat, for he was a rich man now because he had so much money. The servant who cleaned his boots may have thought them remarkably well worn for a man of such means, but that was before he went shopping. Next morning, he bought boots worthy of him and the best clothes. Now that he had turned out to be such a fashionable gentleman, people told him all about the splendors of their town, all about their king, and what a pretty princess he had for a daughter.
Where can I see her? The soldier inquired.
You can't see her at all, everyone said.
She lives in a great copper castle inside all sorts of walls and towers. Only the king can come in or go out of it, for it's been foretold that the princess will marry a common soldier. The king would much rather she didn't."
"I'd like to see her just the same," the soldier thought, but there was no way to manage it. Now he lived a merry life. He went to the theater, drove about in the king's garden, and gave away money to poor people. This was to his credit, for he remembered from the old days what it felt like to go without a penny in your pocket. Now that he was wealthy and well-dressed, he had all too many who called him their friend and a genuine gentleman. That pleased him. But he spent money every day without making any, and wound up with only 2 coppers to his name. He had to quit his fine quarters to live in a garret, clean his own boots, and mend them himself with a darning needle. None of his friends came to see him, because there were too many stairs to climb. One evening, when he sat in the dark without even enough money to buy a candle, he suddenly remembered there was a candle end in the tinderbox that he had picked up when the witch sent him down the hollow tree. He got out the tinderbox, and the moment he struck sparks from the flint of it, his door burst open, and there stood a dog from down under the tree. It was the one with eyes as big as saucers.
"What," said the dog, "is my lord's command?" "What's this?" said the soldier. "Have I got the sort of tinderbox that will get me whatever I want?" "Go get me some money," he ordered the dog. Zip! The dog was gone. Zip! He was back again, with a bag full of copper in his mouth. Now the soldier knew what a remarkable tinderbox he had. Strike it once, and there was the dog from the chest of copper coins. Strike it twice, and here came the dog who had the silver. 3 times brought the dog who guarded gold. Back went the soldier to his comfortable quarters. Out strode the soldier in fashionable clothes. Immediately his friends knew him again, because they liked him so much. Then the thought occurred to him. "Isn't it odd that no one ever gets to see the princess? They say she's very pretty, but what's the good of it as long as she stays locked up in that large copper castle with so many towers? Why can't I see her? Where's my tinderbox?" He struck a light, and zip came the dog with eyes as big as saucers. "It certainly is late," said the soldier, "practically midnight. But I do want a glimpse of the princess, if only for a moment." Out the door went the dog, and before the soldier could believe it, here came the dog with the princess on his back. She was sound asleep, and so pretty that everyone could see she was a princess. The soldier couldn't keep from kissing her because he was every inch a soldier. Then the dog took the princess home. Next morning, when the king and queen were drinking their tea, the princess told them about the strange dream she'd had, all about a dog and a soldier. She'd ridden on the dog's back, and the soldier had kissed her. "Now that was a fine story," said the queen. The next night, one of the old ladies of the court was under orders to sit by the princess's bed, and see whether this was a dream or something else altogether. The soldier was longing to see the pretty princess again, so the dog came by night to take her up and away as fast as he could run. But the old lady pulled on her storm boots and ran right after them. When she saw them disappear into a large house, she thought, "Now I know where it is," and drew a big cross on the door with a piece of chalk. Then she went home to bed, and before long the dog brought the princess home too. But when the dog saw that cross marked on the soldier's front door, he got himself a piece of chalk and cross-marked every door in the town. This was a clever thing to do, because now the old lady couldn't tell the right door from all the wrong doors he had marked. Early in the morning, along came the king and the queen, the old lady and all the officers, to see where the princess had been. "Here it is," said the king when he saw the first cross mark. "No, my dear, there it is," said the queen, who was looking next door. "Here's one, there's one, and yonder's another one," said they all. Wherever they looked, they saw chalk marks, so they gave up searching. The queen, though, was an uncommonly clever woman, who could do more than ride in a coach. She took her big gold scissors, cut out a piece of silk, and made a neat little bag. She filled it with fine buckwheat flour and tied it on to the princess's back. Then she pricked a little hole in it so that the flour would sift out along the way, wherever the princess might go. Again the dog came in the night, took the princess on his back, and ran with her to the soldier, who loved her so much that he would have been glad to be a prince just so he could make her his wife. The dog didn't notice how the flour made a trail from the castle right up to the soldier's window, where he ran up the wall with the princess. So in the morning it was all too plain to the king and queen just where their daughter had been. They took the soldier and they put him in prison.
There he sat. It was dark, and it was dismal, and they told him,
"Tomorrow is the day for you to hang."
That didn't cheer him up any, and as for his tinderbox, he'd left it behind at the inn. In the morning he could see through his narrow little window how the people all hurried out of town to see him hanged. He heard the drums beat, and he saw the soldiers march. In the crowd of running people he saw a shoemaker's boy in a leather apron and slippers. The boy galloped so fast that off flew one slipper, which hit the wall right where the soldier pressed his face to the iron bars.
"Hey there, you shoemaker's boy, there's no hurry," the soldier shouted. "Nothing can happen till I get there. But if you run to where I live and bring me my tinderbox, I'll give you 4 coppers. Put your best foot foremost."
The shoemaker's boy could use 4 coppers, so he rushed the tinderbox to the soldier and, well, now we shall hear what happened. Outside the town, a high gallows had been built. Around it stood soldiers and many 100,000 people. The king and queen sat on a splendid throne, opposite the judge and the whole council. The soldier already stood upon the ladder, but just as they were about to put the rope around his neck, he said the custom was to grant a poor criminal one last small favor. He wanted to smoke a pipe of tobacco, the last he'd be smoking in this world. The king couldn't refuse him, so the soldier struck fire from his tinderbox, once, twice, and a third time. Zip! There stood all the dogs, one with eyes as big as saucers, one with eyes as big as mill wheels, one with eyes as big as the round tower of Copenhagen.
"Help me! Save me from hanging," said the soldier.
Those dogs took the judges and all the council, some by the leg and some by the nose, and tossed them so high that they came down broken to bits.
"Don't!" cried the king.
But the biggest dog took him and the queen too, and tossed them up after the others. Then the soldiers trembled, and the people shouted,
"Soldier, be our king and marry the pretty princess!"
So they put the soldier in the king's carriage. All 3 of his dogs danced in front of it and shouted, "Hurrah!" The boys whistled through their fingers, and the soldiers saluted. The princess came out of the copper castle to be queen, and that suited her exactly. The wedding lasted all of a week, and the 3 dogs sat at the table with their eyes opened wider than ever before. Folks say. Folks often say one thing and mean another. Folks say so much that means so little. Folks say. Folks say. Yes, there is a lot of slander, but also a lot of innocent talk. Both seriousness and humor hide under that saying. Folks say that the age of miracles is past, but that is not true. The age of miracles is still with us, in our souls. It is there that revelations come to man. Although the world may seem arid and desolate, God's fountain of mercy spouts forth within it. Life flourishes, and through inspired music, through poetry and science, God will unfold miracles for us until the judgment day. Folks say that our feelings and thoughts arise from the motions and vibrations of our nerves. Now inspiration, now happiness, now pain. Each one of us is but an instrument. Yes, indeed. But who touches the strings and makes them vibrate and tremble? God's invisible spirit. Folks say funny things, and often with 4 cents worth of malice. Folks say that once there was a lady who dreamed that all her teeth had fallen out, and that she remarked, "Now I'll lose one of my friends." But they said it must have been a false friend, for all the lady's teeth were false. Folks say that when Sarah married the Philistine king Abimelech, she said to her husband, "We will call our son Isaac," for that meant in their language, "Folks will laugh." Old Sarah knew human nature. She knew folks' opinions, and they haven't changed since Sarah's time. Folks say, and this is supposed to be quite true, that the other day one of the severe art critics stood by the seashore watching the waves. "This is superb," he said. "Superb and right." And our Lord took off his hat and answered, "Thank you, Herr Professor." Folks say, yes, folks say, but let that be enough, at least for today. The Ugly Duckling. It was so beautiful out on the country. It was summer. The wheat fields were golden, the oats were green, and down among the green meadows the hay was stacked. There the stork minced about on his red legs, clacking away in Egyptian, which was the language his mother had taught him. Round about the field and meadowlands rose vast forests, in which deep lakes lay hidden. Yes, it was indeed lovely out there in the country. In the midst of the sunshine, there stood an old manor house that had a deep moat around it. From the walls of the manor right down to the water's edge, great burdock leaves grew, and there were some so tall that little children could stand upright beneath the biggest of them. In this wilderness of leaves, which was as dense as the forests itself, a duck sat on her nest, hatching her ducklings. She was becoming somewhat weary, because sitting is such a dull business, and scarcely anyone came to see her. The other ducks would much rather swim in the moat than waddle out and squat under the burdock leaf to gossip with her. But at last the eggshells began to crack, one after another. "Peep, peep," said the little things, as they came to life and poked out their heads. "Quack, quack," said the duck. And quick as quick can be, they all waddled out to have a look at the green world under the leaves. Their mother let them look as much as they pleased, because green is good for the eyes. "How wide the world is," said all the young ducks, for they certainly had much more room now than they had when they were in their eggshells. "Do you think this is the whole world?" their mother asked. "Why, it expands on and on, clear across to the other side of the garden, and right on into the parson's field, though that is farther than I have ever been. I do hope you are all hatched," she said as she got up. "No, not quite all. The biggest egg still lies here. How much longer is this going to take? I'm really rather tired of it all," she said. But she settled back on her nest. "How goes it?" asked an old duck who came to pay her a call. "It takes a long time with that one egg," said the duck on the nest. "It won't crack, but look at the others. They're the cutest little ducklings I've ever seen. They look exactly like their father, the wretch. He hasn't come to see me at all." "Let's have a look at the egg that won't crack," the old duck said. "It's a turkey egg, and you can take my word for it. I was fooled like that once myself. What trouble and care I had with those turkey children, for I may as well tell you, they are afraid of the water, and I simply could not get them into it. I quacked and snapped at them, but it wasn't a bit of use. Let me see the egg." "Certainly. It's a turkey egg." "Let it lie, and go teach your other children to swim." "Oh, I'll sit a little longer. I've been at it so long already that I may as well sit here half the summer." "Suit yourself," said the old duck, and away she waddled. At last the big egg did crack. "Beep," said the young one, and out he tumbled. But he was so big and ugly. The duck took a look at him. "That's a frightfully big duckling," she said. "He doesn't look the least like the others. Can he really be a turkey baby? Well, well, I'll soon find out. Into the water he shall go, even if I have to shove him in myself." Next day the weather was perfectly splendid, and the sun shone down on all the green burdock leaves. The mother duck led her whole family down to the moat. Splash! She took to the water. "Quack, quack," said she, and one duckling after another plunged in. The water went over their heads, but they came up in a flash and floated to perfection. Their legs worked automatically, and they were all there in the water. Even the big, ugly gray one was swimming along. "Why, that's no turkey," she said. "See how nicely he uses his legs, and how straight he holds himself. He's my very own son after all, and quite good-looking if you look at him properly. Quack, quack, come with me. I'll lead you out into the world and introduce you to the duckyard. But keep close to me so that you won't get stepped on, and watch out for the cat." Thus they sallied into the duckyard, where all was in an uproar because two families were fighting over the head of an eel. But the cat got it, after all. "You see, that's the way of the world." The mother duck licked her bill because she wanted the eel's head for herself. "Stir your legs, bustle about, and mind that you bend your necks to that old duck over there. She's the noblest of us all, and has Spanish blood in her. That's why she's so fat. See that red rag round her leg? That's a wonderful thing, and the highest distinction a duck can get. It shows that they don't want to lose her, and that she's to have special attention from man and beast. Shake yourselves. Don't turn your toes in. A well-bred duckling turns his toes way out, just as his father and mother do. This way. So then, now duck your necks and say quack." They did as she told them, but the other ducks around them looked on and said right out loud, "See there! Must we have this brood too, just as if there weren't enough of us already? And fie! What an ugly-looking fellow that duckling is! We won't stand for him." One duck charged up and bit his neck. "Let him alone," his mother said. "He isn't doing any harm." "Possibly not," said the duck who bit him, "but he's too big and strange, and therefore he needs a good whacking." "What nice-looking children you have, mother," said the old duck with the rag around her leg. "They are all pretty, except that one. He didn't come out so well. It's a pity you can't hatch him again." "That can't be managed, your ladyship," said the mother. "He isn't a handsome one, but he's as good as can be, and he swims just as well as the rest, or, I should say, even a little better than they do. I hope his looks will improve with age, and after a while he won't seem so big. He took too long in the egg, and that's why his figure isn't all that it should be." She pinched his neck and preened his feathers. "Moreover, he's a drake, so it won't matter so much. I think he will be quite strong, and I'm sure he will amount to something." "The other ducklings are pretty enough," said the old duck. "Now make yourselves right at home, and if you find an eel's head, you may bring it to me." So they felt quite at home. But the poor duckling who had been the last one out of his egg, and who looked so ugly, was pecked and pushed about and made fun of by the ducks and the chickens as well. "He's too big," said they all. The turkey gobbler, who thought himself an emperor because he was born wearing spurs, puffed up like a ship under full sail, and bore down upon him, gobbling and gobbling until he was red in the face. The poor duckling did not know where he dared stand, or where he dared walk. He was so sad, because he was so desperately ugly, and because he was the laughing-stock of the whole barnyard. So it went on the first day, and after that, things went from bad to worse. The poor duckling was chased and buffeted about by everyone. Even his own brothers and sisters abused him. "Oh," they would always say, "how we wish the cat would catch you, you ugly thing." And his mother said, "How I do wish you were miles away." The ducks nipped him, and the hens pecked him, and the girl who fed them kicked him with her foot. So he ran away, and he flew over the fence. The little birds in the bushes darted up in a fright. "That's because I'm so ugly," he thought, and closed his eyes. But he ran on just the same, until he reached the great marsh where the wild ducks lived. There he lay all night long, weary and disheartened. When morning came, the wild ducks flew up to have a look at their new companion. "What sort of a creature are you?" they asked, as the duckling turned in all directions, bowing his best to them all. "You are terribly ugly," they told him. "But that's nothing to us so long as you don't marry into our family." Poor duckling! Marriage certainly had never entered his mind. All he wanted was for them to let him lie among the reeds and drink a little water from the marsh. There he stayed for 2 whole days. Then he met 2 wild geese, or rather wild ganders, for they were males. They had not been out of the shell very long, and that's what made them so sure of themselves. "Say there, comrade," they said, "you're so ugly that we have taken a fancy to you. Come with us and be a bird of passage. In another marsh nearby there are some fetching wild geese, all nice young ladies who know how to quack. You are so ugly that you'll completely turn their heads." Bing! Bang! Shots rang in the air, and these 2 ganders fell dead among the reeds. The water was red with their blood. Bing! Bang! The shots rang, and as whole flocks of wild geese flew from the reeds, another volley crashed. A great hunt was in progress. The hunters lay under cover all around the marsh, and some even perched on branches of trees that overhung the reeds. Blue smoke rose like clouds from the shade of the trees and drifted far out over the water. The bird dogs came, splash, splash, through the swamp, bending down the reeds and the rushes on every side. This gave the poor duckling such a fright that he twisted his head about to hide it under his wing. But at that very moment, a fearfully big dog appeared right beside him. His tongue lolled out of his mouth, and his wicked eyes glared horribly. He opened his wide jaws, flashed his sharp teeth, and splash, splash, on he went without touching the duckling. "Thank heavens," he sighed. "I'm so ugly that the dog won't even bother to bite me." He lay perfectly still, while the bullets splattered through the reeds as shot after shot was fired. It was late in the day before things became quiet again, and even then, the poor duckling didn't dare move. He waited several hours before he ventured to look about him, and then he scurried away from that marsh as fast as he could go. He ran across field and meadows. The wind was so strong that he had to struggle to keep his feet. Late in the evening, he came to a miserable little hovel, so ramshackle that it did not know which way to tumble, and that was the only reason it still stood. The wind struck the duckling so hard that the poor little fellow had to sit on his tail to withstand it. The storm blew stronger and stronger, but the duckling noticed that one hinge had come loose and the door hung so crooked that he could squeeze through the crack into the room, and that's just what he did. Here lived an old woman with her cat and her hen. The cat, whom she called Sunny, could arch his back, purr, and even make sparks, though for that you had to stroke his fur the wrong way. The hen had short little legs, so she was called Chicky Shortleg. She laid good eggs, and the old woman loved her as if she had been her own child. In the morning, they were quick to notice the strange duckling. The cat began to purr, and the hen began to cluck. "What on earth?" The old woman looked around, but she was short-sighted, and she mistook the duckling for a fat duck that had lost its way. "That was a good catch," she said. "Now I shall have duck eggs. Unless it's a drake, we must try it out." So the duckling was tried out for 3 weeks, but not one egg did he lay. In this house the cat was master and the hen was mistress. They always said, "We and the world," for they thought themselves half of the world, and much the better half at that. The duckling thought that there might be more than one way of thinking, but the hen would not hear of it. "Can you lay eggs?" she said. "No." "Then be so good as to hold your tongue." The cat asked, "Can you arch your back, purr, or make sparks?" "No." "Then keep your opinion to yourself when sensible people are talking." The duckling sat in a corner, feeling most despondent. Then he remembered the fresh air and the sunlight. Such a desire to go swimming on the water possessed him that he could not help telling the hen about it. "What on earth has come over you?" the hen cried. "You haven't a thing to do, and that's why you get such silly notions. Lay us an egg, or learn to purr, and you'll get over it." "But it's so refreshing to float on the water," said the duckling. "So refreshing to feel it rise over your head as you dive to the bottom." "Yes, it must be a great pleasure," said the hen. "I think you must have gone crazy. Ask the cat, who's the wisest fellow I know, whether he likes to swim or dive down in the water. Of myself, I say nothing. But ask the old woman, our mistress. There's no one on earth wiser than she. Do you imagine she wants to go swimming and feel the water rise over her head?" "You don't understand me," said the duckling. "Well, if we don't, who would? Surely you don't think you're cleverer than the cat and the old woman, to say nothing of myself. Don't be so conceited, child. Just thank your Maker for the kindness we have shown you. Didn't you get into this snug room and fall in with people who can tell you what's what? But you are such a numbskull that it's no pleasure to have you around. Believe me, I tell you this for your own good. I say unpleasant truths, but that's the only way you can know who are your friends. Be sure now that you lay some eggs. See to it that you learn to purr or to make sparks." "I think I'd better go out into the wide world," said the duckling. "Suit yourself," said the hen. So off went the duckling. He swam on the water and dived down in it, but still he was slighted by every living creature because of his ugliness. Autumn came on. The leaves in the forest turned yellow and brown. The wind took them and whirled them about. The heavens looked cold as the low clouds hung heavy with snow and hail. Perched on the fence, the raven screamed, "Caw! Caw!" and trembled with cold. It made one shiver to think of it. Pity the poor little duckling. One evening, just as the sun was setting in splendor, a great flock of large, handsome birds appeared out of the reeds. The duckling had never seen birds so beautiful. They were dazzling white, with long, graceful necks. They were swans. They uttered a very strange cry as they unfurled their magnificent wings to fly from this cold land away to warmer countries and to open waters. They went up so high, so very high, that the ugly little duckling felt a strange uneasiness come over him as he watched them. He went around and round in the water like a wheel. He craned his neck to follow their course, and gave a cry so shrill and strange that he frightened himself. Oh, he could not forget them, those splendid, happy birds. When he could no longer see them, he dived to the very bottom, and when he came up again, he was quite beside himself. He did not know what birds they were or whither they were bound, yet he loved them more than anything he had ever loved before. It was not that he envied them, for how could he ever dare dream of wanting their marvelous beauty for himself? He would have been grateful if only the ducks would have tolerated him, the poor ugly creature. The winter grew cold, so bitterly cold that the duckling had to swim to and fro in the water to keep it from freezing over. But every night, the hole in which he swam kept getting smaller and smaller. Then it froze so hard that the duckling had to paddle continuously to keep the crackling ice from closing in upon him. At last, too tired to move, he was frozen fast in the ice. Early that morning a farmer came by, and when he saw how things were, he went out on the pond, broke away the ice with his wooden shoe, and carried the duckling home to his wife. There the duckling revived, but when the children wished to play with him, he thought they meant to hurt him. Terrified, he fluttered into the milk pail, splashing the whole room with milk. The woman shrieked and threw up her hands as he flew into the butter tub, and then in and out of the meal barrel. Imagine what he looked like now. The woman screamed and lashed out at him with the fire tongs. The children tumbled over each other as they tried to catch him, and they laughed and they shouted. Luckily the door was open, and the duckling escaped through it into the bushes, where he lay down in the newly fallen snow, as if in a daze. But it would be too sad to tell of all the hardships and wretchedness he had to endure during this cruel winter. When the warm sun shone once more, the duckling was still alive among the reeds of the marsh. The larks began to sing again. It was beautiful springtime. Then, quite suddenly, he lifted his wings. They swept through the air much more strongly than before, and their powerful strokes carried him far. Before he quite knew what was happening, he found himself in a great garden where apple trees bloomed. The lilacs filled the air with such sweet scent, and hung in clusters from long green branches that bent over a winding stream. Oh, but it was lovely here in the freshness of spring. From the thicket before him came 3 lovely white swans. They ruffled their feathers and swam lightly in the stream. The duckling recognized these noble creatures, and a strange feeling of sadness came upon him. I shall fly near these royal birds, and they will peck me to bits because I, who am so very ugly, dare to go near them. But I don't care. Better to be killed by them than to be nipped by the ducks, pecked by the hens, kicked about by the hen-yard girl, or to suffer such misery in winter. So he flew into the water and swam toward the splendid swans. They saw him and swept down upon him with their rustling feathers raised. "Kill me," said the poor creature, and he bowed his head down over the water to wait for death. But what did he see there, mirrored in the clear stream? He beheld his own image, and it was no longer the reflection of a clumsy, dirty gray bird, ugly and offensive. He himself was a swan. Being born in a duckyard does not matter, if only you are hatched from a swan's egg. He felt quite glad that he had come through so much trouble and misfortune, for now he had a fuller understanding of his own good fortune and of beauty when he met with it. The great swans swam all around him and stroked him with their bills. Several little children came into the garden to throw grain and bits of bread upon the water. The smallest child cried, "Here's a new one!" and the others rejoiced. "Yes, a new one has come!" They clapped their hands, danced around, and ran to bring their father and mother. And they threw bread and cake upon the water, while they all agreed, "The new one is the most handsome of all. He's so young and so good-looking." The old swans bowed in his honor. Then he felt very bashful, and tucked his head under his wing. He did not know what this was all about. He felt so very happy, but he wasn't proud at all, for a good heart never grows proud. He thought about how he had been persecuted and scorned, and now he heard them all call him the most beautiful of all beautiful birds. The lilacs dipped their clusters into the stream before him, and the sun shone so warm and so heartening. He rustled his feathers and held his slender neck high as he cried out with a full heart, "I never dreamed there could be so much happiness when I was the ugly duckling." The Wicked Prince. Once upon a time there was a proud and wicked prince who thought only about how he might conquer all the nations of the earth and make his name a terror to all mankind. He plunged forth with fire and sword. His soldiers trampled down the grain in the fields and put the torch to the peasant's cottage, so that the red flames licked the very leaves from the trees, and the fruit hung roasted from black and charred limbs. Many a poor mother caught up her naked baby and tried to hide behind the smoking walls, but the soldiers followed her, and if they found her and the child, Then began their devilish pleasure. Evil spirits could do no worse, but the prince rejoiced in it all. Day by day his power increased. His name was feared by all, and fortune followed him in all his deeds. From the conquered cities he carried away gold and precious treasures, until he amassed in his capital riches such as were unequaled in any other place. Then he built superb palaces and temples and arches, and whoever saw his magnificence said, "What a great prince!" Never did they think of the misery he had brought upon other lands. Never did they listen to the groans and lamentations from cities laid waste by fire. The prince gazed upon his gold, looked at his superb buildings, and thought like the crowd, "What a great prince! But I must have more, much more. There is no power that can equal, much less surpass mine." So he warred with his neighbors until all were defeated. The conquered kings were chained to his chariot with chains of gold when he drove through the streets, and when he sat at table they lay at the feet of the prince and his courtiers, eating such scraps as might be thrown to them. Now the prince had his own statue set up in the marketplaces and the palaces. Yes, he would even have set it in the churches, on the altars. But to this the priest said, "Prince, you are great, but God is greater. We dare not obey your orders." "Well," said the evil prince, "then I shall conquer God too." In the pride and folly of his heart, he had built a splendidly constructed ship in which he could sail through the air. It was as colorful as a peacock's tail, and seemed decorated with 1,000 eyes, but each eye was the barrel of a cannon. The prince could sit in the center of the ship, and, upon his touching a certain button, 1,000 bullets would stream forth, and the guns would at once be reloaded. Hundreds of strong eagles were harnessed to the ship, and so it flew away, up and up toward the sun. Far beneath lay earth. At first its mountains and forests appeared like a plowed field, with a tuft of green peeping out here and there from the sod. Then it seemed like an unrolled map, and finally it was wholly hidden in mists and clouds, as the eagles flew higher and higher. Then God sent forth a single one of his countless angels, and immediately the prince let fly 1,000 bullets at him, but they fell back like hail from the angels' shining wings. Then one drop of blood, just one, fell from one of the angels' white wing feathers onto the ship of the prince. There it burned itself into it, and its weight of 1,000 hundredweights of lead hurled the ship back down with terrible speed to earth. The mighty wings of the eagles were broken, the winds roared about the head of the prince, and the clouds on every side, sprung from the smoke of burned cities, formed themselves into menacing shapes. Some were like mile-long crabs stretching out their huge claws toward him. Others were like tumbling boulders, or fire-breathing dragons. The prince lay half dead in his ship, until it was finally caught in the tangled branches of a dense forest. "I will conquer God," he said. "I have sworn it. My will shall be done." Then, for 7 years he built other magnificent ships in which to sail through the air, and had lightning beams forged from the hardest of steels to batter down the battlements of heaven itself. From all the conquered countries he assembled vast armies that, when formed in battle array, covered mile after mile of ground. They embarked in the magnificent ships, but as the prince approached his own, God sent forth a swarm of gnats, just one little swarm, that buzzed about the prince and stung his face and hands. In rage he drew his sword, but he could cut only the empty air. He could not strike the gnats. Then he ordered that he be brought costly cloths, which were to be wrapped around him so that no gnat could reach him with its sting. His orders were carried out, but one little gnat had concealed itself in the innermost covering, and now it crept into the prince's ear and stung him. It smarted like fire, and the poison rushed into his brain. He tore the clothes loose and flung them far away from him, rent his garments into rags, and danced naked before the rugged and savage soldiers. Now they could only mock at the mad prince who had started out to conquer God and had been himself conquered by a single little gnat. 5 peas from a pod. There were 5 peas in one pod. The peas were green, and the pod was green, and so they believed that the whole world was green, and that was absolutely right. The pod grew and the peas grew. They adjusted themselves to their surroundings, sitting straight in a row. The sun shone outside and warmed the pod. The rain made it clear and clean. It was nice and cozy inside, bright in the daytime and dark at night, just as it should be. And the peas became larger and more thoughtful as they sat there, for surely there was something they must do. "Shall I always remain sitting here?" said one. "If only I don't become hard from sitting so long. It seems to me there must be something outside. I have a feeling about it." And weeks went by. The peas became yellow, and the pod became yellow. "The whole world's becoming yellow," they said, and that they had a right to say. Then they felt a jerk at the pod. It was torn off, came into human hands, and then was put down into the pocket of a jacket, along with other full pods. "Now it will soon be opened up," they said, and they waited for that. "Now I'd like to know which of us will get the farthest," said the smallest pea. "Yes, now we'll soon find that out." "Let happen what may," said the biggest. Crack! The pod burst open, and all 5 peas rolled out into the bright sunshine. They were lying in a child's hand. A little boy held them, and said that they were suitable peas for his pea shooter. And immediately one was put in and shot out. "I'm flying out into the wide world! Catch me if you can!" And then it was gone. "I'm going to fly right into the sun," said the second. "That's a perfect pod, and very well suited to me." Away it went. "We'll go to sleep wherever we come to," said 2 of the others, "but we'll roll on anyway." And they rolled about on the ground before being put into the shooter, but they went into it all the same. "We'll go the farthest." "Let happen what may," said the last one as it was shot into the air, and it flew up against the old board under the garret window, right into a crack, where there was moss and soft soil, and the moss closed around the pea. There it lay hidden, but not forgotten by our Lord. "Let happen what may," it said. Inside the little garret lived a poor woman who went out by the day to polish stoves. Yes, even to chop up wood and do other hard work, for she had strength and she was industrious. But still she remained poor. And at home in the little room lay her half-grown only daughter, who was so frail and thin. For a whole year the girl had been bedridden, and it seemed as if she could neither live nor die. "She will go to her little sister," the woman said. "I had 2 children, and it was hard for me to care for both, but then our Lord divided with me and took the one home to himself. I wanted to keep the one I have left, but probably he doesn't want them to be separated, and she will go up to her little sister." But the sick girl stayed. She lay patient and quiet the day long, while her mother went out to earn money. It was springtime, and early one morning, just as the mother was about to go to work, the sun shone beautifully through the little window across the floor. The sick girl looked over at the lowest window pane. "What is that green thing that's peeping in the window? It's moving in the wind." And the mother went over to the window and opened it a little. "Why," she said, "it is a little pea that has sprouted here with green leaves. How did it ever get here in the crack? You now have a little garden to look at." And the sick girl's bed was moved closer to the window, where she could see the growing pea vine, and the mother went to her work. "Mother, I think I am going to get well," said the little girl in the evening. "The sun today shone so warmly in on me. The little pea is prospering so well, and I will also prosper, and get up and out into the sunshine." "Oh, I hope so," said the mother, but she didn't believe it would happen. Yet she was careful to strengthen with a little stick the green plant that had given her daughter such happy thoughts about life, so that it wouldn't be broken by the wind. She tied a piece of string to the windowsill and to the upper part of the frame, so that the vine could have something to wind around as it shot up, and this it did. You could see every day that it was growing. "Look, it has a blossom," said the woman one morning. And now she had not only the hope, but also the belief that the little sick girl would get well. She recalled that lately the child had talked more cheerfully, and that the last few mornings she had risen up in bed by herself, and sat there and looked with sparkling eyes at the little pea garden with its one single plant. The following week the sick child for the first time sat up for over an hour. Joyous, she sat there in the warm sunshine. The window was open, and outside stood a fully blown pink pea blossom. The little girl bent her head down and gently kissed the delicate leaves. This was just like a festival day. Our Lord himself planted the pea, and made it thrive to bring hope and joy to you, my blessed child. And to me, too, said the happy mother, and smiled at the flower, as if to a good angel from God. But now the other peas. Well, the one that flew out into the wide world crying, "Catch me if you can!" fell into the gutter of the roof and landed in a pigeon's crop, where it lay like Jonah in the whale. The two lazy ones got just that far, for they also were eaten by pigeons, and that's being of real use. But the fourth pea, who wanted to shoot up to the sun, fell into a gutter and lay for days and weeks in the dirty water, where it swelled up amazingly. "I'm becoming so beautifully fat," said the pea. "I'm going to burst, and I don't think any pea can, or ever did, go farther than that. I am the most remarkable of the 5 from the pod." And the gutter agreed with it. But at the garret window stood the young girl, with sparkling eyes and the rosy hue of health on her cheeks. And she folded her delicate hands over the pea blossom and thanked our Lord for it. "I still stand up for my pea," said the gutter. Urbanus. In a cloister there lived a young man named Urbanus, who was pious and studious. He was entrusted with the keys to the cloister's book collection, and faithfully guarded this treasure. He wrote many beautiful books, and frequently studied the Holy Scriptures and other works. Then one day Urbanus, who had been reading the writings of the Apostle Paul found in the Bible, "For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night." This impressed the young man as being quite impossible. He could not believe it, and he was tormented by doubt and ponderous thoughts. It so happened that one morning the monk walked down from the gloomy library and out into the beautiful sunlit cloister garden, and found a little gaily colored woodbird sitting on the ground looking for a few grains of corn. Presently it flew up onto a branch, where it sang most strangely and wonderfully. The little bird was not at all shy, and it permitted the monk to come very close. He would have liked to catch it, but the bird flew off, from tree to tree. The monk followed it, and it sang continuously with a clear and lovely voice. But the young monk could not catch it, although he pursued it for a considerable distance from the cloister garden into the wood. He finally gave up and returned to the cloister, but what he saw looked strangely changed to him. Everything had become extended, larger and more beautiful, both the buildings and the garden, and instead of the low little old cloister church stood a mighty cathedral with 3 towers. The monk thought this strange and almost magical, and when he reached the cloister gate and hesitantly pulled the bell cord, he was met by a gatekeeper who was a complete stranger to him, and who astoundedly drew away from him. As the monk walked through the cloister cemetery, he noticed many, many tombstones that he did not remember having seen before. And when he approached the cloister brethren, they all drew away from him horrified. Only the abbot, but not the abbot he had known, another, younger one, completely unknown to him, stood still, and pointing the crucifix toward him, he said,
In the name of the crucified, who are you, unsaintly soul who has risen from the grave? And what are you searching for among us the living?"
At that the monk shuddered, and with downcast eyes he staggered like a senile old man. And look, he had a long silver-white beard that reached down below his belt, where the bunch of keys to the locked bookcases still hung. With shy reverence the monks led the curious-looking stranger to the abbot's seat. Then the abbot gave the library key to a young monk, who opened the library door and brought forth a handwritten chronicle in which one could read that a monk named Urbanus had completely vanished some 300 years previously. No one knew if he had escaped or had met with an accident. "Oh, wood-bird, was it your song?" said the stranger with a sigh. "I followed you and listened to your song for less than 3 minutes, and in the meantime 3 centuries went by. You have sung for me the song about eternity. The eternity I could not understand, but now I understand, and worship you, O Lord, in the dust. I am but a grain of dust," he said, bowing his head, and his body vanished into dust.